I said I don't want any visitors, Margaret. Nathaniel Blackwood's voice cut through the intercom like ice. He stood at the window of his Newport mansion, staring at the turbulent Atlantic waters below the cliff. Sir, it's about Harper, the housekeeper replied, her voice hesitant. She's having another episode. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the third floor. Nathaniel closed his eyes, his knuckles white against the crystal tumbler in his hand. The amber liquid inside barely moved, much like the man himself. Contained, controlled, cold. I'll be right up. The grand staircase of Blackwood Manor felt endless as he climbed to the east wing. The child's screams grew louder with each step. 6 months since the accident, and the nightmares hadn't subsided. Outside Harper's room, Mrs. Winters, the current nanny, stood wringing her hands. Mr. Blackwood, I've tried everything. She keeps saying she saw her parents' helicopter again. Leave us, Nathaniel said, not bothering to look at the woman. It would be her last day anyway, the fourth nanny to quit in as many months. Inside, the 7-year-old girl had overturned her nightstand. Tear tracks stained her flushed cheeks as she clutched a tattered stuffed rabbit. When she saw Nathaniel, she froze. They were there again, Harper whispered, her voice small. In the fire. Nathaniel approached carefully, crouching down to her level despite his 6'4" frame feeling awkward in the position. His suit, perfectly tailored as always, strained against his shoulders. It was just a dream, he said, his voice softer than anyone at Blackwood Tech had ever heard. You're safe here. Harper's eyes, the same shade of blue as his late wife's, stared through him. Mom said to tell you it wasn't your fault. The words hit him like a physical blow. Nathaniel stood abruptly, turning away to hide the crack in his composure. The board meeting. The last-minute changes. The helicopter he'd insisted they take to save time. Try to sleep, Harper. He reached for the door. Are you sending me away? The question stopped him cold. Mrs. Winters said you don't know how to take care of a child. That you only adopted me because you felt guilty. Nathaniel turned slowly. Is that what she said? Harper nodded, clutching her rabbit tighter. You're not going anywhere. The words came out as a vow. This is your home now. Back in his study, Nathaniel poured another drink, his phone screen lighting up with messages from the board. Blackwood Tech stock had dropped another 5 points after his third consecutive absence from quarterly meetings. The business press had taken to calling him the recluse of Rhode Island. $12 billion in personal wealth, and he couldn't fix the one thing that mattered. The knock at his door was soft but insistent. Enter. Margaret stood in the doorway, her gray hair pulled into its usual tight bun. After 30 years managing his household, she was the only one who dared speak plainly to him. Mrs. Winters has given her notice, sir. Unsurprising. Nathaniel didn't look up from his drink. She says the child is. Margaret paused, disturbed. That Harper needs professional help. What she needs is someone who won't quit at the first sign of difficulty. Nathaniel's voice was sharp. Find someone else. With all due respect, sir, we've tried the traditional agencies. Your reputation has. She cleared her throat. Word has spread. My reputation? That you're impossible to work for, especially now. Margaret's eyes softened slightly. Since Eliza, the mention of his wife's name was like a knife between his ribs. Then try untraditional agencies. Someone with experience in trauma. A child psychologist. Whatever it takes. There is one possibility, Margaret said carefully. A young woman with a psychology background. She's worked with traumatized children before, though she's not with an agency. Name? Serenity Hayes. 28. Her references are impeccable. Serenity. Nathaniel almost laughed. Sounds like a spa treatment, not a person. She comes highly recommended by the Astors. Helped their youngest after the boating accident last summer. Nathaniel waved his hand dismissively. Fine. Bring her in tomorrow. There's one more thing, sir. Margaret hesitated. Ms. Reynolds called again. The board is threatening to invoke the incapacity clause if you miss the next meeting. Vivian Reynolds. His sister-in-law. Always so concerned about Blackwood Tech's future, especially the parts she might inherit through Harper. Tell Vivian that if she wants to discuss business, she can come here. I'm not leaving Harper. After Margaret left, Nathaniel moved to his desk where a silver frame held the last photo taken of Eliza. Her smile, captured in mid-laugh as they sailed Narragansett Bay, haunted him daily. How am I supposed to do this? He whispered to the empty room. I couldn't even keep our own marriage from falling apart before you. He couldn't finish the sentence. His phone buzzed again. Another email from his COO. Competitors moving on quantum integration. Decision needed ASAP. Once, the thrill of business had been everything. Now it all seemed hollow. What was the point of building the future when your own had been ripped away? Upstairs, Harper's nightlight cast shadows across the hall. Nathaniel paused outside her door, listening to her even breathing. Finally asleep. Tomorrow, another stranger would enter their broken home, promising to fix what couldn't be fixed. Nathaniel returned to his study, to his drink, to the silence that was his only companion. What he didn't know was that Serenity Hayes was about to change everything, and that she had secrets of her own. The morning brought steel-gray skies and driving rain that lashed against the windows of Blackwood Manor. Nathaniel watched from his study as a modest Honda Civic navigated the long, winding driveway. Not the vehicle he expected from someone associated with the Astors. He straightened his tie, annoyed at himself for caring what impression he made. The last 4 nannies had lasted an average of 3 weeks each. This one would be no different. Margaret knocked precisely at 9. "Ms. Hayes has arrived, sir." Nathaniel nodded, not looking up from his laptop screen. "Give me 5 minutes, then show her in." When the door opened again, he deliberately kept his eyes on his work, a power move he'd perfected in boardrooms across the country. 10 seconds passed before he glanced up. Serenity Hayes stood patiently, seemingly unbothered by his tactics. Her dark hair fell in loose waves past her shoulders, and her simple navy dress was professional but unpretentious. What caught Nathaniel off guard were her eyes, amber with flecks of gold that seemed to see straight through his facade. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice carrying a slight southern lilt. "Thank you for meeting with me." Nathaniel gestured to the chair across from his desk. "I understand you have experience with traumatized children." "I do," she replied, sitting with a natural grace. "Though each child's trauma is unique, as is their path to healing. No platitudes about time healing all wounds." "Interesting. Harper isn't an easy case," he said bluntly. "She witnessed the death of her parents 6 months ago. The nightmares are getting worse, not better." Serenity nodded. "Children process grief differently than adults." "Has she been able to talk about what happened?" "Only in fragments. Usually during the nightmares." Nathaniel leaned back. "She says things that couldn't possibly." He stopped himself. "That couldn't possibly be true?" Serenity finished. "Children often use metaphors to process what they can't understand. It doesn't mean she's lying or hallucinating." Nathaniel studied her face. "The Astors spoke highly of your work with their son. Client confidentiality prevents me from discussing specific cases," she replied evenly. "Yet you come with no formal certifications." "I have a master's in child psychology from Columbia, Mr. Blackwood. What I don't have is a clinical practice. I prefer to work one-on-one in a child's home environment." "And why is that?" he challenged. A flicker of something, pain, perhaps, crossed her face before disappearing. "Because trauma doesn't respect office hours," she said simply. "When a child is drowning in grief at 3 in the morning, a weekly therapy session isn't enough." The answer surprised him. "The position requires living on-site. You'd have the East Wing guest suite." "I understand. The last nanny found Harper difficult." "Most people find grief difficult to witness," Serenity countered. "Especially in children. We expect them to bounce back, to be resilient. But sometimes they need to sit in their pain before they can move through it." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "Harper needs stability, not psychological experiments." "May I meet her?" Serenity asked, unfazed by his tone. Instead of answering, Nathaniel pressed the intercom. "Margaret, please bring Harper to my study." The silence that followed was tense. Nathaniel found himself uncomfortable under Serenity's steady gaze. Most people fidgeted, filled the void with nervous chatter. She simply waited, centered and calm. When the door opened, Harper entered holding Margaret's hand. The child's blonde hair was pulled into a messy ponytail, her eyes downcast. "Harper," Nathaniel said, his voice awkwardly formal. "This is Ms. Hayes. She might be staying with us for a while." Harper looked up, assessing Serenity with the wary expression of a child who had seen too many adults come and go. Serenity didn't approach her. Instead, she knelt down, putting herself at Harper's level. "Hello, Harper. That's a beautiful rabbit you have." The child clutched her stuffed animal tighter. "His name is Astronaut." "Astronaut. That's an important job." Serenity smiled. "Has he been to space?" For the first time since entering, Harper's expression shifted. He's been to the moon 3 times. But he gets scared of the dark sometimes. Everyone gets scared sometimes, Serenity said. Even astronauts. Even grown-ups. Harper's eyes darted to Nathaniel and back to Serenity. Not him. Serenity glanced at Nathaniel, a knowing look passing between them. Would you like to show me your room, Harper? Maybe Astronaut could give me a tour. After a moment's hesitation, Harper nodded. She turned to leave, then stopped, looking back at Serenity. Can you make the bad dreams go away? The question hung in the air, laden with a desperation that made Nathaniel's chest tighten. I can't promise they'll go away completely, Serenity said honestly. But I can promise I'll be there when you have them. Something in the way she said it, with such quiet certainty, made Nathaniel believe her. After they left, Margaret lingered. Well, arrange the guest suite, Nathaniel said, and have legal draw up the contracts. Later that afternoon, as Nathaniel reviewed quarterly projections, a sound filtered through the house that stopped him mid-sentence during a conference call. Laughter. Harper's laughter. He excused himself and followed the sound to the solarium, a room unused since Eliza's death. There, amid the neglected plants, he found Harper and Serenity sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by paper and colored pencils. And then Astronaut has to fly past the storm clouds, Harper was saying, her small hands animating the story. What's happening here? Nathaniel asked, his voice sharper than intended. Harper flinched, but Serenity remained composed. We're drawing Harper's dreams, she explained. Sometimes getting them out on paper makes them less scary. I see, he said, though he didn't, not really. It's nearly time for dinner, Harper. Can Miss Hayes eat with us? Harper asked, surprising them both. Nathaniel hesitated. He'd taken his meals alone in his study since the accident, leaving Harper to eat with whatever nanny was currently employed. Of course she can, he finally said. She'll be living here, after all. Harper's face lit up, a glimpse of the child she'd been before tragedy struck. You're staying? If that's okay with you, Serenity said, her eyes on Harper, though Nathaniel felt the question was partly meant for him as well. Only if you promise to help Astronaut with his bad dreams too. That's a deal. Serenity extended her pinky finger, which Harper solemnly linked with her own. As Nathaniel watched them, a realization struck him with uncomfortable clarity. For the first time in 6 months, Harper looked hopeful. And that hope had nothing to do with him. That night, as he sat alone in his study, the sound of the ocean crashing against the cliffs below, Nathaniel found himself thinking of Serenity Hayes' strange, knowing eyes. There was something both soothing and unsettling about her presence. Like she could see the cracks in his careful armor. What he didn't know, couldn't know, was that Serenity had spent years preparing for this moment. That her arrival at Blackwood Manor was no coincidence. And that beneath her calm exterior lay a mission that would either heal or destroy what remained of his shattered world. 2 weeks passed, and Blackwood Manor had started to transform. Small changes at first. Curtains drawn back to let sunlight filter through leaded glass windows, fresh flowers on side tables, and most noticeably, music drifting through previously silent corridors. Nathaniel paused outside the kitchen, arrested by the sound of Harper giggling. He peered through the doorway where Serenity was teaching the child to knead bread dough, both of their hands coated in flour. The secret is to imagine you're giving it a really firm massage, Serenity explained, demonstrating with her palms. Harper attacked her lump of dough with enthusiastic, if uncoordinated, movements. Like this. Perfect. Your bread is going to be the best one. Nathaniel cleared his throat, and both heads turned toward him. Harper's smile dimmed slightly, a reaction that cut deeper than he cared to admit. Mr. Blackwood, Serenity acknowledged, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. Would you like to join us? No. He faltered, feeling strangely like an intruder in his own home. I have calls to make. The board meeting is tomorrow. Serenity nodded, her expression neutral, but something in her eyes seemed to challenge him. Can you at least try my bread when it's done? Harper asked in a small voice. Nathaniel found himself nodding. Of course. The relieved smile that spread across Harper's face was worth the commitment. Later that evening, after receiving an email that Vivian would be attending tomorrow's board meeting to represent family interests, Nathaniel found himself wandering toward the conservatory. He hadn't entered the space in months. It had been Eliza's favorite room, filled with exotic plants from her global travels. He pushed open the glass doors, expecting dust and neglect. Instead, he found the room alive with greenery. The withered plants had been pruned back, new growth already visible on their branches. The air was warm and humid, the scent of earth and growing things replacing the sterile emptiness that had pervaded the house. In the center of the room, Serenity sat cross-legged on a bamboo mat, her eyes closed, her breathing deep and measured. Nathaniel turned to leave, but a floorboard creaked beneath his foot. "You don't have to go," Serenity said without opening her eyes. "This space belongs to you, after all. I didn't mean to interrupt your whatever this is." Now she looked at him, those amber eyes calm and direct. "Just meditation. It helps me process the day." She gestured to the empty mat beside her. "You're welcome to join me. I don't meditate. Everyone has their own way of escaping," she said, rising fluidly to her feet. "Mine just happens to involve staying present." The subtle dig wasn't lost on him. "And what exactly do you think I'm escaping from, Miss Hayes?" "That's not for me to say." She ran her hand along the leaf of a monstera plant. "These were nearly dead when I arrived. But plants are resilient. They remember how to live, even after trauma." "Is this a metaphor for Harper? Maybe for all of you." Serenity moved toward a tropical orchid that was showing new buds. Eliza had excellent taste in plants. The casual mention of his wife's name startled him. Most people tiptoed around it, afraid to trigger his grief. "How do you know they were hers?" "Harper told me. She said her mother could make anything grow." Serenity turned to face him fully. "She remembers more than you might think." Nathaniel's throat tightened. "What else has she told you?" "That she misses Sunday pancakes. That her mother used to sing when she thought no one was listening. That you used to smile more." The words landed like physical blows. He moved to the far side of the room, ostensibly to examine a palm frond. "Harper is improving," he said stiffly. "That's what matters. She's not the only one who needs healing in this house." Nathaniel turned sharply. "I didn't hire you to psychoanalyze me, Miss Hayes. No, you hired me to help a grieving child whose guardian is drowning in his own unprocessed pain." Serenity's voice remained gentle despite the directness of her words. "Children are mirrors, Mr. Blackwood. They reflect what they see." Anger flared, but beneath it lurked something more dangerous: vulnerability. "You overstep your bounds." "Perhaps." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Harper asked me why you never talk about her mother. She thinks it's because you didn't love her." The accusation landed like a slap. "That's absurd." Eliza was. He couldn't finish the sentence. "Was what?" Serenity prompted softly. "Everything." The word escaped before he could stop it. She was everything, and now she's gone. What exactly would you have me tell a 7-year-old about that kind of loss? The truth. That it hurts. That it's not fair. That some days you can barely breathe from missing her. Serenity took a step closer. "Harper already knows all of this, Nathaniel. What she needs is to know she's not alone in feeling it." The use of his first name hung in the air between them. No one had spoken to him this way since Eliza died, as if he were a person, not a crisis to be managed or an asset to be protected. "The board meeting tomorrow," he said suddenly. "Vivian will be there." Serenity's expression shifted subtly. "Harper's mentioned her aunt. They don't seem close. Vivian has her own agenda where Harper is concerned. She believes I'm unfit to raise her." "Are you?" The question wasn't accusatory, just straightforward. "I don't know," he admitted, the honesty surprising them both. "But I know Vivian's interest has more to do with Blackwood Tech than with Harper's well-being." Serenity nodded thoughtfully. "Well, you have one advantage Vivian doesn't." "What's that?" "You're here. You show up, even when it's hard." She smiled slightly. "Especially when it's hard." A clap of thunder broke the moment, and rain began to beat against the glass ceiling of the conservatory. The sudden darkness made the space feel intimate, secluded from the rest of the world. "Why are you really here, Serenity?" The question had been bothering him since she arrived. "Someone with your skills could work anywhere." A shadow passed over her face. "Let's just say I understand what it means to lose everything, to have to rebuild from ashes." Before he could press further, the conservatory door burst open and Harper ran in, clutching a loaf of misshapen bread. "It's ready," she announced triumphantly. "Margaret helped me finish it." Nathaniel found himself smiling, a real smile, not the practiced one he used for business associates. "It looks interesting." Harper giggled. "It's ugly, but Serenity says it might still taste good. An important life lesson." Serenity said, winking at Harper. Appearances can be deceiving. As they shared the surprisingly edible bread in the warm conservatory, rain drumming overhead, Nathaniel felt something shift inside him. A crack in the ice that had encased his heart since the accident. What he didn't notice was the measuring look Serenity gave him when he laughed at something Harper said, a look that contained equal parts warmth and secret grief. Nor did he see the flash of something like guilt that crossed her face when Harper took her hand with the easy trust of a child who had found safety. Neither of them noticed the sleek black car that pulled up the driveway, nor the sharp-featured woman who stepped out, her calculating eyes taking in the cozy scene through the conservatory windows before she turned toward the main entrance of Blackwood Manor. Vivian Ashcroft had arrived early, and she was not pleased with what she saw. "Nathaniel, darling, you look absolutely dreadful." Vivian Ashcroft breezed into the foyer, her Louboutins clicking against the marble floor. She air-kissed both his cheeks before he could step back. Running a multi-billion-dollar company from self-imposed exile clearly doesn't suit you. "The meeting isn't until tomorrow, Vivian." Nathaniel maintained his composure despite the unexpected arrival. "To what do I owe this pleasure?" Vivian removed her designer coat, handing it to a startled Margaret. "Family concern, of course. The board is restless. Shareholders are questioning your stability." Her gaze drifted toward the conservatory. "And I see you've hired new help." Before Nathaniel could respond, Serenity and Harper emerged, still laughing about their baking adventure. Harper froze when she saw Vivian, instinctively moving closer to Serenity. "Aunt Vivian," Harper said, her voice small. "Harper, sweetheart." Vivian's smile didn't reach her eyes. "My goodness, you're covered in flour. Is this how she's being looked after, Nathaniel?" "We were baking bread," Harper said defensively. "How domestic." Vivian's gaze shifted to Serenity, assessing her from head to toe. "And you must be the new nanny. Miranda, was it?" Serenity Hayes. She extended her hand, which Vivian took reluctantly. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Ms. Ashcroft. Harper has mentioned you. All good things, I hope." Vivian's laugh was brittle. "Harper, darling, why don't you run along and clean up? The adults need to talk." After Harper reluctantly left, Vivian turned to Nathaniel. "Really, Nate? Another young, pretty caretaker? The board is already questioning your judgment." "Ms. Hayes is highly qualified," Nathaniel replied coldly. "And my personal staffing decisions are not the board's concern. Everything is the board's concern when the CEO is behaving erratically." Vivian glanced at Serenity. "No offense, dear, but we're discussing family matters now." "Of course." Serenity nodded respectfully. "I'll check on Harper." As soon as Serenity was out of earshot, Vivian's demeanor changed. "I had to prevent a vote of no confidence last week. Xavier Milton is gathering support. You need to return to Boston, resume your duties properly. I'm managing things from here." "You're hiding," Vivian snapped. "My sister has been dead for 6 months, Nathaniel. The company, her legacy, is at risk while you play house with her charity case." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "Harper is not a charity case. She's my daughter now." "Is she?" "The adoption isn't finalized. If the board determines you're unfit to lead Blackwood Tech, how long before social services questions your fitness as a parent?" The thinly veiled threat hung in the air between them. "What do you want, Vivian?" "The same thing I've always wanted. What's best for this family?" She softened her tone. "Come back to headquarters. Let Harper attend Westlake Academy as planned. They have excellent resources for troubled children. She stays with me." Vivian sighed dramatically. "At least join us for dinner tonight. The executive team is gathering at the Vanderbilt. Show your face, reassure them. Bring the nanny if you must. Someone should watch Harper." After Vivian departed for her hotel, promising to return for him at 7, Nathaniel found himself drawn to his late wife's study. The room remained untouched since her death, preserved like a museum exhibit. He rarely entered it, finding the space too saturated with memories. Today, however, something pulled him inside. Perhaps it was Vivian's invocation of Eliza's legacy, or the unsettling feeling that he was losing control of the narrative. Eliza's desk was meticulously organized, even in her absence. Financial reports, philanthropy projects, personal correspondence, all sorted into neat piles. He ran his fingers along the edge of the leather blotter, remembering how she would sit here late into the night, reviewing quarterly projections for Blackwood Tech with the same passion she brought to her humanitarian work. A soft knock interrupted his reverie. Serenity stood in the doorway, hesitant to enter this sacred space. "Harper's asking if she can have dinner with Margaret tonight," she said. "I gather you have plans." Vivian's insistence, not mine. He gestured for Serenity to enter. "You'll need to accompany me, unfortunately. Harper shouldn't be left alone after Vivian's visit. She tends to have nightmares when her aunt appears." Serenity stepped inside, her eyes taking in the personal touches that made the room distinctly Eliza's. Family photos, artifacts from humanitarian trips, a half-finished novel still bookmarked on the side table. She was remarkable, Serenity observed quietly. "Harper has her smile." Nathaniel looked up sharply. "Did you know her?" "No," Serenity said quickly, too quickly, "just from what Harper has shared. And the foundation work, of course. Everyone in the nonprofit world knew of Eliza Blackwood." Something about her response felt off, but Nathaniel couldn't place why. Before he could question further, Serenity continued. "Ms. Ashcroft seems very concerned about the company. Vivian has always been ambitious. When Eliza was alive, she channeled it into the Blackwood Foundation. Now," he trailed off. "Now she sees an opportunity," Serenity finished. She moved to the bookshelf, examining the titles. "Through Harper." "Precisely." Nathaniel watched her carefully. "You see a lot for someone who's only been here 2 weeks." Serenity turned to face him. "Observation is a key skill in my profession. Children aren't the only ones who reveal themselves through behavior rather than words. And what has my behavior revealed, Ms. Hayes? That you're fighting battles on multiple fronts. The company. Harper. Your grief." She paused. "Perhaps it's time to let someone else shoulder some of the weight." The dinner at the Vanderbilt was exactly as Nathaniel had expected, a transparent attempt by Vivian to parade him before the executive team like a trained bear. Serenity, dressed in a simple black dress borrowed from Margaret, her own clothes being too casual for the upscale restaurant, drew curious glances from the assembled business elite. "And what exactly do you do for Nathaniel, Miss Hayes?" Xavier Milton asked over dessert, his tone suggesting impropriety. Before Serenity could answer, Nathaniel intervened. "Ms. Hayes is a child psychologist helping Harper through her trauma. She's been more effective in 2 weeks than the previous specialists were in months." "How fortunate," Vivian said with a tight smile. "Though I still believe Westlake Academy would provide more comprehensive support." The conversation shifted to business matters, the quantum computing initiative, the potential DoD contract, the Asian market expansion. Nathaniel found himself automatically engaging, his business instincts taking over despite his prolonged absence. What he didn't expect was Serenity's astute questions about the ethical implications of their AI development, which earned her respectful nods from the chief ethics officer. As the evening concluded, the storm that had threatened all day finally broke. Rain pounded the streets of Newport as they waited for the valet to bring Nathaniel's car. "She's not what I expected," Vivian murmured, watching Serenity chat with the restaurant host. "Where exactly did you find her?" "She came highly recommended," Nathaniel replied, deliberately vague. "By whom?" Vivian persisted. "Does it matter? Harper is thriving under her care." Vivian's eyes narrowed. "Everything about that child matters to me, Nathaniel. She's my niece, my sister's daughter in all but blood. Yet you've visited her exactly twice since the accident. Some of us don't have the luxury of retreating from the world to process our grief," Vivian shot back. "I've been keeping Eliza's company afloat while you hide in that mausoleum you call a home." The valet arrived with the car, ending their confrontation. The drive back to Blackwood Manor was tense, the rhythmic sweep of windshield wipers the only sound until Serenity spoke. "The storm's getting worse," she observed. "The coastal road might flood." As if on cue, a lightning bolt split the sky, momentarily illuminating the cliffside ahead. In that brief flash, Nathaniel could have sworn he saw a figure standing at the edge, arms outstretched toward the churning sea below. He slammed on the brakes, the car skidding on the wet asphalt. "What is it?" Serenity asked, alarmed. Nathaniel peered through the rain-lashed windshield. "Nothing but darkness and pounding rain. I thought I saw someone," he said, shaken. "On the cliff." Serenity placed her hand on his arm, a gesture both comforting and electric. "There's no one there, Nathaniel. Just the storm playing tricks." But as they continued driving, Serenity's gaze lingered on the spot where the apparition had appeared, her expression unreadable in the shadows. Back at the manor, they found Harper awake despite the late hour, sitting by the window in her bedroom, watching the storm with wide eyes. "You came back," she said when she saw them, relief evident in her voice. "Of course we did," Serenity assured her, sitting on the edge of the bed. "We'll always come back to you, Harper." The child's eyes moved from Serenity to Nathaniel. "Promise." Something in her voice, the raw need for certainty in an uncertain world, broke through Nathaniel's careful restraint. He knelt beside her bed, taking her small hand in his. "I promise, Harper. You're home now. With me." As Harper finally drifted to sleep, thunder still rumbling in the distance, Nathaniel found Serenity waiting for him in the hallway. "You did well in there," she said quietly. "It's the bare minimum," he replied, suddenly exhausted. Promising not to abandon a child who's already lost everything. Sometimes the bare minimum is all we can manage. Her eyes held his. "But it's enough for tonight." In that moment, with rain lashing the windows and the house creaking around them, something shifted between them, a recognition, perhaps, of shared pain and tentative healing. What neither of them knew was that Vivian had already set forces in motion that would soon bring Serenity's carefully constructed facade crumbling down, and with it, the fragile peace that had begun to take root at Blackwood Manor. The weeks following Vivian's visit brought an unexpected calm to Blackwood Manor. Harper's nightmares grew less frequent, and Nathaniel found himself attending more meetings virtually, engaging with the business he had once loved. The board's threat of invoking the incapacity clause quieted, at least temporarily. On a crisp autumn morning, Nathaniel paused outside the kitchen, arrested by the sight of Serenity and Harper making breakfast together. There was an easy rhythm to their movements, a casual intimacy that made his chest ache with something between jealousy and gratitude. "Mr. Blackwood?" Margaret appeared at his elbow. The courier delivered these documents from Miss Ashcroft's office. She marked them urgent. The large envelope contained preliminary proxy statements for the upcoming annual shareholder meeting, along with a handwritten note from Vivian. "Time to decide whose side you're on. The board won't wait forever." Nathaniel frowned, scanning the documents until a particular clause caught his eye, a proposed restructuring of the trust that controlled Harper's inheritance, with Vivian named as primary executor in the event of continued leadership instability. "Is something wrong?" Serenity's voice startled him. She stood in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Vivian being Vivian," he replied, tucking the papers away. "Nothing unexpected." Serenity's gaze lingered on the envelope. "Harper wants to know if you'll join us for breakfast. She made your coffee herself." The simple request shouldn't have felt momentous, but it did. How long had it been since he'd shared a meal with Harper outside of the obligatory dinner appearances? "I can spare 30 minutes, he said, surprising both of them. Breakfast stretched to 45 minutes, then an hour, as Harper excitedly shared details about the tide pool ecosystem she and Serenity had been studying. For the first time in months, Nathaniel found himself fully present, engaged not out of obligation, but genuine interest. "Can we have my birthday party on the beach?" Harper asked suddenly. "Serenity says we could invite my old friends from Boston." The question caught Nathaniel off guard. Harper's 8th birthday was approaching, her first without her parents. The first since the adoption. "I thought perhaps something quiet here at the house," he began. "But I'm better now," Harper insisted. "Serenity says it's important to celebrate being alive." Nathaniel met Serenity's eyes across the table. "Does she now?" "Life doesn't stop for grief," Serenity said softly. "It runs alongside it." The wisdom in her words, simple yet profound, struck him. A beach party sounds perfect. Harper's face lit up with genuine joy, a sight that had become less rare since Serenity's arrival. As the child ran upstairs to start making invitations, Nathaniel lingered at the table. "Thank you," he said simply. Serenity tilted her head. "For what exactly?" "For showing me how to be present for her. I've been so focused on protecting her that I forgot how to just be with her." "You were doing your best with an impossible situation," Serenity replied. "Sometimes we need an outside perspective." Their eyes held for a moment too long, the connection between them shifting subtly into something neither was ready to name. The preparations for Harper's birthday consumed the household over the next 2 weeks. Invitations were sent to her former classmates in Boston, the beach access point was cleared, and Margaret orchestrated catering with military precision. On the evening before the party, Nathaniel found Serenity in the conservatory, arranging wildflowers for table centerpieces. "Harper's finally asleep," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "She's too excited to settle down." Serenity smiled, her fingers deftly weaving stems together. "It's good to see her looking forward to something." "She adores you," Nathaniel observed, moving further into the room. "You've become essential to her, to this household." The implication hung between them. "I'm just doing my job," Serenity demurred, though a faint blush colored her cheeks. "We both know it's more than that." Nathaniel took a seat across from her. "You've brought life back to this place. To Harper. To me." Serenity's hands stilled. "Nathaniel, I'm not blind, Serenity. Something's happening between us. It's complicated," she whispered, not meeting his eyes. "Life is complicated." He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. "But this, whatever it is, feels like the first uncomplicated thing I've experienced in a long time." The moment stretched between them, electric with possibility. Then Serenity withdrew her hand. "There are things you don't know about me," she said, her voice tight. "Things that would change how you see me." Before Nathaniel could respond, his phone rang. Vivian's name flashed on the screen. With an apologetic glance at Serenity, he answered. "This isn't a good time, Vivian." "It never is, with you." Vivian's voice was sharp. "But you'll want to hear this. I've been doing some digging on your precious Miss Hayes." Nathaniel's stomach clenched. "Whatever vendetta you're pursuing, she's not who she claims to be, Nathaniel. Her name isn't even Serenity Hayes. It's Sarah Harrington." The name meant nothing to him. "Is this really? She's Martin Harrington's daughter." The revelation hit like a physical blow. Martin Harrington, his former partner, the man he'd accused of embezzling company funds 5 years ago. The man who had subsequently lost everything and taken his own life rather than face prosecution. Nathaniel's gaze shot to Serenity, who was watching his face with growing alarm. "I'll call you back," he said to Vivian, ending the call. "What is it?" Serenity asked, though her expression suggested she already knew. "Martin Harrington," Nathaniel said flatly. "You're his daughter." The color drained from Serenity's face. "How did you?" Vivian did some research. He stood abruptly. "Were you ever going to tell me? Or was the plan to get close to Harper, gain my trust, and then? What exactly?" "It's not what you think," Serenity said, rising to face him. "What I think," Nathaniel's voice turned icy, "is that you infiltrated my home under false pretenses. You used a traumatized child to get close to me. Was revenge the goal? Or something more elaborate?" "I came here because I needed to understand." Serenity's composure finally cracked. "My father maintained his innocence until the day he died. He said you framed him, that you orchestrated everything." "Of course he did," Nathaniel laughed bitterly. "Easier than admitting he stole from his own company, betrayed his closest friend." "He wasn't a thief," Serenity insisted. "He was a good man who trusted the wrong person. And that person was me?" Nathaniel's voice rose. "I found the offshore accounts myself, traced the missing funds directly to him. Those accounts were set up in his name, but he didn't create them." Tears filled Serenity's eyes. "Someone with intimate knowledge of Blackwood Tech's security protocols did." The accusation hung in the air between them. Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating the conservatory in stark white light. "Get out," Nathaniel said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Pack your things and be gone before Harper wakes up." "Please," Serenity pleaded. "Let me explain. I came here with questions, yes, but what's happened since? With Harper? With you? That's real." "Real?" Nathaniel's laugh was hollow. "You constructed an elaborate lie to get close to my family. You used a child's trauma to further your agenda." "That's not true." Serenity took a step toward him. "I genuinely care for Harper. And for you. More than I ever expected to." "Save it." Nathaniel turned away. "I've heard enough lies to last a lifetime." "Just answer me one thing," Serenity said, her voice breaking. "The night before my father died, he received a call. The next morning, he left a note saying, 'Eliza knows the truth.'" "What did he mean?" Nathaniel froze. "You're suggesting my wife was involved in your father's downfall?" "I'm asking if she might have discovered something. Something that could have cleared his name." "Enough." Nathaniel's control finally shattered. "Eliza is gone. Your father is gone. Whatever conspiracy you've constructed to absolve him ends now. You have 1 hour to leave this house." As he stormed out, he nearly collided with Harper, standing wide-eyed in the hallway, her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest. You're sending Serenity away? Her small voice was filled with betrayal. Harper, you should be in bed, Nathaniel said, immediately tempering his tone. You promised. Harper's accusation cut straight to his heart. You promised no more people would leave. This is different, he tried to explain. Serenity isn't who we thought she was. She's my friend, Harper insisted, tears welling in her eyes. She keeps the bad dreams away. Nathaniel crouched to her level. I know this is hard to understand. But just like Aunt Vivian, Harper interrupted, the words landing like a slap. You only care about grown-up things, not about me. With that, she turned and ran back to her room, leaving Nathaniel kneeling alone in the hallway, torn between his instinct to protect and the devastation on his daughter's face. An hour later, as rain pounded against the windows, Nathaniel watched from his study as Serenity placed her single suitcase in the trunk of her car. She paused, looking up at the house one last time, her face illuminated briefly by lightning. In that flash, he could see the tears streaming down her cheeks. Something twisted painfully in his chest, doubt, regret, or perhaps the recognition that in trying to protect his family, he might have just torn it apart. As Serenity's taillights disappeared down the long driveway, the sound of Harper's muffled sobs echoed from upstairs. Tomorrow was supposed to be a celebration, a milestone in her healing. Instead, Nathaniel had ripped away the one person who had helped her feel safe again. His phone lit up with another call from Vivian. This time, he let it go to voicemail. What he couldn't know, was that Serenity wasn't leaving Newport. She was driving straight to the office of a private investigator who had been helping her piece together the final days of her father's life. And the file waiting for her, there contained information that would shake the foundations of everything Nathaniel believed about his wife, his company, and the tragedy that had shattered both their lives. Harper's birthday dawned gray and miserable, matching the mood inside Blackwood Manor. The beach party had been hastily canceled, with Margaret calling parents to explain that Harper had fallen ill. It wasn't entirely a lie. The child had refused to leave her room since Serenity's departure, her eyes red-rimmed, and accusing whenever Nathaniel attempted to speak with her. She won't eat anything, Margaret reported, concern etched on her weathered face. Just sits by the window watching the driveway. Nathaniel rubbed his temples, guilt and doubt warring within him. She'll understand eventually. Serenity, Ms. Hayes, wasn't who she claimed to be. Perhaps not, Margaret said carefully. But she made that child smile again. That's a fact, regardless of her name. In his study, Nathaniel stared at the investigative file Vivian had sent over. Sarah Harrington, age 28, master's in child psychology from Columbia. That part had been true. Daughter of Martin Harrington, former CFO of Blackwood Technologies, who had committed suicide after allegations of embezzlement. The connection was obvious, the motive clear. Yet doubt gnawed at him. If revenge had been Serenity's aim, why the elaborate charade? She'd had countless opportunities to harm him or the company. Instead, she'd focused on healing Harper, on bringing light back into their darkened home. His phone buzzed with Vivian's 10th call of the day. He finally answered. The board is convening an emergency session, she said without preamble. Xavier's making his move. You need to be here. Not today. It's Harper's birthday. For God's sake, Nathaniel, your entire legacy is at stake. Harper will have other birthdays. The callousness of the statement crystallized something for him. You know what, Vivian? You're right. This has gone on long enough. I'll be there in an hour. He hung up before she could respond, then called for Margaret. I need you to prepare the small conference room and set up the secure video link. And bring my gift for Harper from the safe. Margaret nodded, a hint of approval in her eyes. Upstairs, Nathaniel knocked softly on Harper's door before entering. The child sat curled in the window seat, astronaut clutched to her chest. Her expression shuddered when she saw him. I know you're angry with me, he began, sitting beside her. You have every right to be. Harper remained silent, staring out at the rain-lashed grounds. I made a mistake last night, Nathaniel continued. I reacted without thinking, without listening. That was wrong of me. This got her attention. Harper turned slightly, wariness in her blue eyes. I have something for you. He handed her a small velvet box. Happy birthday, Harper. She opened it reluctantly, then gasped. Inside lay a delicate silver locket with a compass rose engraved on its surface. It was your mother's, Nathaniel explained. Eliza wore it every day. She said it reminded her that no matter how lost you feel, you can always find your way home. Harper's fingers trembled as she touched the necklace. She showed it to me once. Said it was magic. In a way, it is. Nathaniel gently lifted the locket, opening it to reveal two tiny photographs, one of Eliza, the other of Harper's birth parents. It holds the people who love you, who will always guide you, even when you can't see them. Tears filled Harper's eyes as he fastened the chain around her neck. I miss Serenity, she whispered. She understood about the bad dreams. I know you do. Nathaniel took a deep breath. That's why I need your help with something important today. In the conference room, the virtual board meeting was already underway when Nathaniel entered, Harper by his side. Vivian's face registered shock from the main screen, flanked by the other board members. Nathaniel, this is highly inappropriate, Vivian began. We're discussing sensitive. Actually, this is exactly where Harper should be. Nathaniel's voice was calm but steely. Since you're all so concerned about my fitness as her guardian. He guided Harper to a seat, then faced the assembled board members. For 6 months, I've been grieving, for my wife, for Harper's parents, for the life we all lost. I retreated because I needed to focus on what matters most. He placed a hand on Harper's shoulder. This company exists because Eliza and I wanted to build something that would outlast us, something that would make the world better. It was never about power or control, Vivian. Vivian's expression hardened. This emotional display doesn't change the fact that your leadership has been compromised. The trust issues alone. Speaking of trust, Nathaniel interrupted. I've taken the liberty of launching an investigation into the original embezzlement case against Martin Harrington. It seems there were irregularities that warrant a closer look. A flash of something, fear, crossed Vivian's face. This is absurd. That case was settled years ago. Nothing was settled, Nathaniel countered. A man took his life believing he'd been framed. His daughter spent years searching for the truth. I owe it to them, and to this company, to make sure justice was actually served. As the meeting descended into chaos, Nathaniel guided Harper from the room, his decision made. There would be consequences, battles ahead, but for the first time in months, his path was clear. Are we going to find Serenity? Harper asked, hope brightening her eyes. Yes, Nathaniel nodded, the weight of months of grief and isolation finally lifting. It's time to bring her home. Rain lashed against the windows of the modest Newport in where Serenity had taken refuge. Spread across the bed were documents, photographs, and financial records, the fragments of her father's life and downfall that she'd spent years collecting. A knock at the door startled her. She glanced at the clock, nearly midnight. No one knew she was here except James, she called, approaching the door cautiously. It's me, came the familiar voice of the private investigator who had been helping her piece together her father's final days. She opened the door to find James Sullivan drenched from the storm, clutching a waterproof portfolio. You need to see this, he said without preamble, stepping inside and shaking water from his coat. I finally got access to your father's personal email archive. The tech guys just decrypted the files. Serenity's heart raced as James laid out printouts on the bed, pushing aside her existing documents. 3 days before his death, your father emailed Eliza Blackwood directly, bypassing Nathaniel completely. James pointed to the timestamp. He sent her files, financial records showing the money trail. She knew. Serenity whispered, scanning the emails. More than that. James handed her another document. She responded, agreeing to meet him privately. The location was redacted, but the timing matches your father's calendar entry for the morning he died. Serenity sank onto the edge of the bed, her mind racing. So Eliza discovered something, confronted someone, and then she died in a helicopter crash 6 months later, James finished grimly. Along with Harper's parents. That's a hell of a coincidence, Serenity murmured. There's more. James pulled out a final document. I managed to access the NTSB's preliminary investigation into the helicopter crash. The official report cited mechanical failure, but one investigator noted anomalies consistent with tampering. Tampering? Serenity felt sick. Are you saying it wasn't an accident? I'm saying there are questions that were never adequately answered. James gathered the papers. Questions that someone might kill to keep buried. The implications were staggering. If Eliza had discovered evidence that Martin Harrington was framed, if she had confronted the real culprit, I need to get back to Blackwood Manor, Serenity said suddenly. Harper could be in danger. After Nathaniel threw you out? That's not. You don't understand. If Eliza was murdered because she knew the truth, then whoever did it might see Harper as a threat too. She has her mother's things, her private papers. What if there's something there, something that could expose them? As if in answer to her fears, Serenity's phone rang. An unknown number. She answered cautiously. Ms. Hayes. Margaret's voice was tense. You need to come back to the manor immediately. It's Harper. Nathaniel paced the hospital corridor, his world collapsing for the second time in 6 months. Harper's small form lay motionless in the pediatric ICU bed, machines beeping steadily around her. Food poisoning? He demanded of the doctor. That's your diagnosis? Dr. Chin's expression remained professional but concerned. The symptoms align with severe food poisoning, but the intensity of the reaction is unusual. We're running toxicology screens now. She barely ate anything today, Nathaniel insisted. She was upset about. He stopped himself. It was her birthday. The cake, Margaret said suddenly from her chair in the corner. Ms. Ashcroft brought it personally this afternoon. Said it was a peace offering. Nathaniel's blood ran cold. Vivian brought a cake? While I was on a call with the investigators. Margaret nodded. Harper only had a small piece. She said it tasted strange, but I thought it was just because she was upset. The doctor's pager beeped. He glanced at it, then back at Nathaniel. I need to check these results. Excuse me. Once alone with Margaret, Nathaniel's composure finally broke. If anything happens to her. Ms. Hayes is on her way, Margaret said quietly. Nathaniel looked up sharply. You called Serenity. Harper was asking for her. Before she lost consciousness. A fresh wave of guilt washed over him. If he hadn't sent Serenity away, if he had listened instead of reacting. Mr. Blackwood. Dr. Chun had returned, his expression grave. We've identified the substance. It's not typical food poisoning. Harper has ingested a concentrated form of oleander extract. It's highly toxic. Is she going to? Nathaniel couldn't finish the question. We're administering the appropriate treatments, but the next few hours will be critical. Do you have any idea how she might have been exposed to this substance? Before Nathaniel could respond, commotion erupted at the end of the hallway. Serenity burst through the double doors, soaked from the rain, her face pale with fear. Where is she? She demanded, then spotted Nathaniel. Their eyes met across the corridor, anger, fear, and desperate hope converging in that single look. Oleander poisoning, Nathaniel said without preamble. In a cake Vivian brought. Understanding dawned in Serenity's eyes. The file. What file? Nathaniel stepped closer. My investigator found evidence that your wife knew my father was innocent. She had arranged to meet him the day he died. Serenity's words tumbled out in a rush. And there are irregularities in the helicopter crash investigation. It might not have been an accident. The pieces suddenly aligned in Nathaniel's mind. Vivian's increasing desperation to control the company, her obsession with Harper's guardianship, her convenient arrival just as he was beginning to heal. Vivian, he whispered, the betrayal cutting deeper than he could have imagined. My own sister-in-law. Sir, Margaret interrupted, her voice urgent. Ms. Ashcroft is downstairs. She's demanding to see Harper. Nathaniel's expression hardened. Call security. And the police. We need proof, Serenity insisted. If she's behind all this, my father, the helicopter, Harper, we need concrete evidence. The evidence is in Eliza's study, Nathaniel realized suddenly. That's why Vivian wanted Harper at Westlake Academy, away from the house. She's been searching for something. The locket, Serenity said, remembering Harper's birthday gift. Is there anything inside it besides the photos? Nathaniel stared at her, comprehension dawning. A micro SD card. Eliza always backed up her most important files, kept them with her. She was paranoid about data security. We need that locket. Serenity turned to Dr. Chun. Harper was wearing a silver locket when she was brought in. Where are her belongings? As Dr. Chin directed a nurse to retrieve Harper's personal items, shouting erupted from the hospital lobby. Security guards were restraining Vivian as she fought to access the elevators. I'm family, she screamed. That's my niece. Nathaniel moved to the window overlooking the lobby, watching as police officers entered and approached Vivian. Her composure cracked as they read her rights. You can't prove anything. Vivian's voice carried up to them. It was an unfortunate accident. Children eat things they shouldn't all the time. The nurse returned with a plastic bag containing Harper's clothes and the silver locket. With trembling fingers, Serenity opened the Compass Rose case, carefully removing the photos to reveal a tiny microSD card tucked behind them. Eliza knew, Nathaniel whispered. All this time, she knew who was really embezzling from the company. And she trusted Harper to keep it safe, Serenity added softly. Even if she couldn't. As they rushed to find a computer that could read the card, alarms suddenly blared from Harper's room. Medical staff converged, and Nathaniel felt his world tipping on its axis once more. She's crashing, a nurse called out. BP dropping. In that moment, standing helpless in the hospital corridor, Nathaniel reached for Serenity's hand. She took it without hesitation, their fingers intertwining as they faced the abyss together. What they didn't see was the small twitch of Harper's fingers, the faint flutter of her eyelids as she fought her way back from the brink, guided by a silver compass and the love of those who refused to let her go. 3 months after Harper's brush with death, Blackwood Manor buzzed with life. The winter chill had finally broken, and spring's first tentative blooms dotted the coastal garden where Nathaniel stood watching Harper chase butterflies with Astronaut clutched in one hand. The silver locket gleamed at her throat, catching the afternoon sunlight. The evidence on Eliza's microSD card had been devastating. Encrypted financial records, email correspondence, and a detailed account of how Vivian had systematically drained company funds through ghost accounts, all carefully framed to implicate Martin Harrington. When confronted with her crimes, Vivian had crumbled, confessing not only to the embezzlement but to tampering with the helicopter that took Eliza and Harper's parents. "Your empire or mine," she had told investigators, her voice hollow. Eliza was going to expose everything. I couldn't let that happen. The door behind Nathaniel opened, and Serenity stepped onto the terrace. The past months had transformed their relationship, grief and healing intertwining until something new and stronger emerged from the ashes of their shared tragedies. "The reporter from the Times just left," she said, joining him at the balustrade. "Your statement clearing my father's name will run tomorrow." Nathaniel nodded, his eyes never leaving Harper. "It doesn't feel like enough. It's a start." Serenity's hand found his, their fingers intertwining naturally. "The Martin Harrington Foundation will do the rest, helping families affected by corporate fraud, supporting suicide prevention." That would have mattered to him. In the garden, Harper spotted them and waved excitedly. The shadows had finally receded from her eyes, replaced by the resilience of a child who had faced the darkness and emerged stronger. "I never thought we'd get here," Nathaniel admitted. "After that night in the hospital, when she flatlined. But she came back to us," Serenity reminded him gently. "She chose to fight." The memory of those terrifying moments when Harper's heart had stopped still haunted them both. The frantic activity of the medical team, the desperate prayers, and the miraculous moment when her rhythm stabilized, her eyes fluttering open to find them both at her bedside. "Did you see the lighthouse?" Harper had whispered, her voice barely audible. "Mom was there. She said it wasn't time yet. Weather dream or something more." The experience had marked a turning point for all of them. "The board approved the new leadership structure," Nathaniel said, changing the subject. "The company will be in good hands while we focus on Harper." Serenity smiled. "And the Blackwood Harrington Reconciliation Fund? Any pushback?" "Unanimous support, surprisingly. Though calling it reconciliation might be a bit on the nose, given our history." She laughed, the sound still new enough to delight him. "I think it's perfect. 2 broken legacies repaired through truth." Harper abandoned her butterfly chase and ran toward them, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Can we go to the lighthouse now?" "You promised." The old Newport lighthouse had become a special place for their unconventional family, a symbol of finding their way home through the darkest storms. "Get your jacket," Nathaniel told her, his voice warm with an ease that once seemed impossible. "It's still chilly by the water." As Harper darted inside, Serenity turned to face him fully. "I've been thinking about what happens next. My apartment lease is up at the end of the month." "Stay," Nathaniel said simply. "Not as Harper's caretaker. Not as a guest. Stay because this is where you belong now. With you," she whispered, the words half question, half statement. Instead of answering, he kissed her, a promise more binding than any contract or vow. When they parted, the last shadows seemed to lift from his eyes. I thought my life ended with Eliza, he admitted, that I didn't deserve a second chance at happiness. But loving you doesn't diminish what she was to me. It honors her, in a way, because she would want this for you. For Harper. Harper bounded back onto the terrace, interrupting the moment with the perfect timing of an excited child. I'm ready. Can astronaut wear his special explorer hat? Later, as they stood on the lighthouse promontory, the setting sun painting the Atlantic in shades of gold and amber, Nathaniel watched Serenity and Harper leaning over the railing, pointing out sailing ships on the horizon. The bitter man who had retreated from life seemed like a stranger now, a ghost finally laid to rest. Mom would like her, Harper said suddenly, appearing at his side while Serenity explored the lighthouse keeper's quarters. She told me so. In your dream? Nathaniel asked gently. Harper fingered her locket thoughtfully. Not just there. I can feel it, like the compass inside. Some things you just know. Out of the mouths of babes, Nathaniel thought, wrapping an arm around his daughter's shoulders. Some things you just know. As twilight deepened, the lighthouse beam began its nightly rotation, a steady pulse of light sweeping across the darkening water, guiding lost souls home, just as they had found their way back to each other.